Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about Raging Bull. Well, this was bound to happen. Me talking about Martin Scorsese. I'm actually surprised it hasn't happened sooner because he is quite possibly my favorite filmmaker of all time. I have difficulty picking favorites of anything of all time because it feels like such a permanent thing. There's many directors that pop into my mind when I think of all-time favorites. You know, Tarantino, the Coen brothers, Spielberg, James Cameron, Sam Raimi, John Carpenter. I mean, the list can go on. There's a lot of filmmakers I admire, but Martin Scorsese, very obviously, he's almost subjectively so one of the greatest. I don't think I've ever met a film lover who doesn't like Martin Scorsese. I know Martin Scorsese fans that don't like certain movies in his catalog. The movie I'm talking about is one of them. I wanted to talk about Raging Bull. Now, Raging Bull is not my favorite Scorsese movie. My favorite Scorsese movie is probably Goodfellas. It's the movie I've watched the most out of Scorsese's filmography. I've seen that movie, I can't even tell you how many times. It's a movie that me and my dad really love, so we've watched it together over the years. And so that was probably my all-time favorite. But Raging Bull is a movie that, I find myself revisiting every couple of years. I don't watch this movie like on an annual basis like I do a Goodfellas or Pulp Fiction or The Godfather, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Those are movies I revisit almost like every year without even thinking about it. Raging Bull is a movie that I just find myself like, oh, you know what? It's been like maybe 3 or 4 years since I watched Raging Bull. I want to watch it again. And because it's a movie that is very challenging. It is not an easy movie to like. In fact, I know even though the movie is very acclaimed now, at the time of its release back in 1980, it was somewhat mixed. You know, both Siskel and Ebert very much championed the movie, and I believe Roger Ebert had it listed in his top 10 favorite movies of the 1980s.
The first film on my list for 1980s is exactly the same film, Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull, and there was no question in my mind. I think that's kind of amazing that we would be in agreement on that. But of the films that I saw in the last 10 years, this is the one that went out there on a high wire, and it never looked down, and it kept right on going. This is the one where the director was really swinging for the bleachers.
But at the time of the movie's release, Raging Bull was kind of mixed in terms of people watching a character, Jake LaMotta, based on the real-life boxer, watching a character who's so downright despicable and unlikable. And I wanted to talk about this movie specifically because my most popular review as of right now is St. Elmo's Fire. And in that movie, I talk about me hating the movie because the characters are assholes, right? And but I do explain in that video specifically, it's not just the fact that the characters are unlikable. It's the fact that they're shallow and surface level, and it's very soap opera bullshit. It's just not a genuine or sincere movie when it comes to exploring these flawed characters. They're more or less soap opera characters, and I don't like characters like that in movies. I don't like the phoniness of it. It's just not. It doesn't appeal to me. I like movies that, when we're dealing with flawed characters, I like movies that really dig deep and it gets to a point where it's feeling incredibly genuine and, you know, eye-opening. And it gives you a doorway into looking at people that are insanely flawed. And to me, I find that very interesting because I'm interested in human behavior in general. And so that's why Raging Bull is up there as one of my favorite movies, even though it's a movie I don't revisit often. In fact, I think I've only seen this movie maybe three times in my life, all very large gaps in between those viewing periods because it's a tough movie. In fact, I'm going to read Pauline Kael's review. I'm going to read a short snippet of Pauline Kael's review. For those who may not know, Pauline Kael is a very respected, influential film critic, right up there with Roger Ebert. And she was not a fan of Raging Bull. And here's a small snippet of that review, which I think is hilarious. I know I'm supposed to be responding to a powerful, ironic realism, but I just feel trapped. Jake says, "You dumb fuck," And Joey says, "You dumb fuck." And they repeat it, and I think, what am I doing here watching these two dumb fucks? I get her criticism. And when I was looking on Letterboxd and IMDb, there were actually quite a few negative reviews of Raging Bull of people like, I don't understand why this movie's so highly regarded. Jake LaMotta is just an insufferable piece of shit human being. What am I supposed to get out of this, right? It's a completely fair criticism, I have to say. And I'm not here to try to make the argument that you have to like Raging Bull. This is a very hard movie to love. And I say that as someone who really does love this movie. It does challenge you in terms of trying to find the humanity of this character. So I'm going to read my review, my Letterboxd review. I think it's one of my proudest reviews. It took me a long time to write this review. Sometimes when I watch a movie, my feelings with it are so complex that it takes me a while to try to find the words to describe how I feel about a movie. It was really interesting reading some of the negative reviews of Raging Bull on both Letterboxd and IMDb. Most of the reviews were saying the same thing. They thought the movie looked great and that all of the performances were great, but the character of Jake LaMotta was too unlikable and unsympathetic. Funny enough, when Raging Bull was first released back in 1980, many critics thought practically the same thing. Now, I would never say that everyone has to like Raging Bull. It's a tough film to watch, and it's very uncompromising in its depiction of a boxer who is a violent, uncontrollable animal, both in and outside of the ring. But I will say that anyone who thinks that Raging Bull falters as a movie because Jake LaMotta is too unlikable is kind of missing the entire point of the film. The title, Raging Bull, says it all. That's who Jake LaMotta is. The film is a cautionary tale about a man who has no control over himself. He can't control his anger, he can't control his jealousy, and because of that, he ends up losing control over his life. He loses his brother, his wife, and his children due to the uncontrollable rage that is constantly boiling inside of him. It all culminates into one of the most powerful scenes I've ever seen in a film, where Jake is thrown into a solitary cell and he's seen beating and slamming his head into the cement wall, screaming and crying that he is not an animal. It's a scene that stays with you because of De Niro's powerhouse performance and because at that moment, you begin to realize that Jake really can't control himself. It's as if he's been cursed to be this raging bull for the rest of his life. I can't help but feel sympathy for him in that scene, regardless of how terrible he's been throughout the film. As I said, Raging Bull is a tough watch, but it's also an incredibly rewarding one, or at least it is for me. This is my third time watching it, and it's grown on me significantly as a result. Every time I watch this film, I am left in awe. Scorsese directs the hell out of this movie. Visually, it's easily one of his strongest and most mesmerizing. De Niro's performance is not just one of the best, but it's also one of the finest performances in the history of cinema. Raging Bull is a must-watch for anyone who's even remotely interested in the art of filmmaking. It is one of the finest examples in the entire medium. I wrote that review November 20th, 2023. I did not rewatch the movie for this video because it's in here. It's a movie that you can watch every couple of years. You don't need to rewatch it all the time because there are just certain moments in that scene that are just burned in your memory. And I don't want to make it sound like Raging Bull is a completely, downbeat experience. The movie actually has some humor in it.
Son of a bitch is calling me an animal. Hey, you!
Come on, Jack.
I'm gonna get hold of that dog and I'm gonna eat him for lunch. You hear what I'm saying? You hear me, Larry? Larry!
As you can find in pretty much nearly all of Scorsese's movies, there are some laugh-out-loud moments in Raging Bull. It sounds odd, but it's true. Joe Pesci has one of the funniest movie insult lines I've ever heard.
You listening? Your mother sucks big fucking elephant dicks. You got that?
And overall, he's just amazing in this movie because it's Joe Pesci. He's amazing in everything. But ultimately, like I said in that review, I love a movie that can challenge you. A movie that can try to get you to see something about a character who is basically a monster. Very famously, when Jake LaMotta watched Raging Bull with his ex-wife Vicky, who's played by Kathy Moriarty in the film, he supposedly went up to her and was like, "Was I really that bad?" And she's like, "You were worse." So the movie, according to Vicky, actually pulled its punches in terms of depicting Jake LaMotta. And like I said, this is not going to be a movie that everybody likes. But I guess I just wanted to emphasize that I do love movies with flawed characters, but it takes kind of an extraordinary filmmaker to really peel back the layers of a character who's so despicable and try to find the humanity in him. It's a hard thing to do, but Scorsese is one of the best at it. And he was born to make movies, that Marty Scorsese. God bless him. Like I said, there are so many Martin Scorsese movies that I'm going to talk about in the future. You better be ready for a Taxi Driver review, a King of Comedy review. I have a lot of thoughts on the King of Comedy, one of my favorite Scorsese movies, one of the most underrated. Goodfellas, Casino. I'm going to talk about all those movies because I absolutely love Martin Scorsese. But yeah, I was reading my St. Elmo's Fire comments, and that's what kind of spurred me talking about, well, if we want to talk about movies with flawed characters, doesn't really get more challenging than Raging Bull, and I find that movie to be a masterpiece. So please, guys, tell me in the comments what you think about this movie. What are your thoughts on it? What are your favorite Martin Scorsese movies? What are Martin Scorsese movies you would specifically like me to talk about? And as always, thank you guys for watching.